dates, models, guest list. Just do your best, darling.
As you can see, I will never have a career in lip sync, and I never thought I'd introduce an episode by lip syncing to Jennifer Saunders from Absolutely Fabulous, but that will all become relevant later on. This is episode 90 of Mark Talks About His Stuff, and it is Sunday, the 2nd of May, 1991. You will have noticed two things which don't happen very often. The first one is it's actual daylight outside because it is a Sunday. The second one is it's a Pet Shop Boys t-shirt, and that is because today I am going to be talking about Pet Shop Boys' 5th album, which is very widely regarded as a classic, and rightly so, which was released in 1993, and talking around the period that surrounds that album and why this album is to me a firm favourite. I also kind of point out that I try to rotate the bands that I talk about, so you're not going to get 16 episodes in a row about U2, which I'm sure some of you are appreciative of, and some of you are sat there going, I want the U2 stuff. That will all come, and I've already done loads of it already. The second thing is that what I am aware of is I seem to spend a lot of time talking about very, very old records. The reason being is that whilst life has to be lived forward and can only be understood backwards, it makes sense to go chronologically through bands' careers and their activity, because otherwise it's difficult to start kind of like referring back to and going, oh, well, hang on a minute, back in this thing that happened in 1989, which I haven't yet talked about, all that type of stuff. So we're going to pick up as a Pet Shop Boys story, late 1991, just after the release of Was It Worth It, the second single from the Discography album. Hard to believe it's 30 years ago now, because that still feels very, very recent to me indeed. And the first thing, which you may or may not know about, is a Scottish artist called Cicero, and Pet Shop Boys co-produced most of his album. His album is called Future Boy. I'll talk about that in a second. The first single that had a Pet Shop Boys influence was Love Is Everywhere, and Pet Shop Boys produced or co-produced the track, had programming by Pete Gledel, who became a very big influence on Pet Shop Boys in future years, and Neil sings backing vocals on this, and you can very clearly hear his voice in that. It also has bagpipes. No song is perfect. I hate bagpipes. Might explain why I don't listen to this one too often. Now, Pete Gledel now holds the role as Pet Shop Boys kind of musical programmer, director, runs and manages the technology on their live shows. Did a lot of programming for the 1989 and 1991 tours, but at this point became more integrated into the band's operation alongside their management, Mark Farrow, the designer, and a number of other people that they work with to help them achieve their aims. Probably the best way to describe it is that Pete Gledel is effectively almost the cinematographer who's worked on a vast majority of Pet Shop Boys recordings ever since, to help the band realise their vision in much the same way as Janusz Kaminski, I think, is currently Steven Spielberg's cinematographer of choice. So 1991, obviously a busy year for the band. Greatest hits album, discography, few singles, world tour. 1992, much quieter. There were 2 live shows by Pet Shop Boys. One at the Manchester Hacienda on the 15th of May 1992, which is available for streaming on Mixcloud if you want to hear it, and another show at the New York City Roseland Ballroom, I think on the 8th of July 1992. I can't find any recordings of that. I did have a t-shirt of the Hacienda show, but I sold it on eBay for lots of money when I needed lots of money. And I do regret it, but at the same point I don't, and it was the right thing to do. So you will see more Pet Shop Boys t-shirts as we go along. Cicero released his album Future Boy in 1992, and Pet Shop Boys produced and sang backing vocals on a number of songs. So there are, I think, That Loving Feeling, Heaven Must Have Sent You Back to Me, My Middle Class Life, and Love Is Everywhere, all on side one of the album. Have a heavy Pet Shop Boys influence in them, in much the same way as the band had worked on and produced the recordings by Dusty Springfield for half of Reputation, and Liza Minnelli for all of Results, and that 8th Wonder single as well. This is, if you haven't heard it, well worth tracking down, especially if you want a prime slice of early 90s Pet Shop Boys, because obviously the band have evolved over time. There's also a CD single of Love Is Everywhere. Now, I have to give you a warning about this CD single. This is manufactured by PDO. I have mentioned them in a previous episode about New Order. be careful which one you get, because there is PDO Disco². The extended version of it has a lot more Pet Shop Boys bleeps and bloops and nil-turn backing vocals. Now, also, 1992 saw the band working on the soundtrack to the film The Crying Game, which you may or may not have heard of. I won't spoil the ending of it for you, but they co-produced a number of tracks on here. So a Boy George track, The Crying Game itself, and the Cicero track, Live for Today, as well. So there's 4 or 5 Pet Shop Boys co-productions on the soundtrack album, which was released on their label, Spaghetti Recordings, and also this single by Boy George, The Crying Game. Now, this is where I do have to tell you, almost all of the copies of the Crying Game CD single are in a terrible state. Look at that. That is thanks to PDO and their cheap Disco² and cheap lacquers. You can literally see here, if you look at the edges of the CD, the music quite literally falling off the disc there, right at the edges. So thank you, PDO in Preston, I hate ye. Neil also sang vocals on a single by Electronic, which I mentioned in the previous episode of New Order Solo Works. This one's called Disappointed, and it's just a wonderful pop song. And then all things went very, very quiet. Now, there was at the Hacienda show in 1992, the band did perform a cover version of Village People's Go West, and they recorded it in 1992, and they were all ready to release it, backed with a new song called Forever in Love, but they decided not to use that version, and instead it took much longer until that version was released. First fruits that we had from the band, actually, in terms of their new material, was this. Came out in June 1993, Can You Forgive Her? Now, my life had changed quite a lot in between the time when Pet Shop Boys had released the last single, or more correctly, the first single off their most recent album, Behaviour. So when that happened in September 1990, I had no concept of adult relationships, had never lived away from home, had a full head of hair, and was hopeful that at some point some man or woman might actually like me enough to let me kiss them. By the time Can You Forgive Her had come out, I was 2 years into a fantastic relationship, and I was living away from home at university in Leicester, or if you pronounce it correctly, Leicester, as I've heard a tourist call it. I shouldn't criticise the way in which the English language uses its words, because obviously Wednesday should also be called Wednesday, and hemorrhage would probably be absolutely unpronounceable, as indeed would pneumonia. Anyway, Can You Forgive Her is the first single off the 5th Pet Shop Boys album, and Can You Forgive Her is a wonderfully vicious, bitchy song written in the third party between 2 people inside a relationship, where there's a form of jealousy, where one person seems to be far more interested in the memories that they've had, and there's some conflict around gender identity and sexuality that sits within there. 2 CD singles, by the way. One CD single has a 7-inch mix and a track called Hey Headmaster on it, as well as Rollo remixes of Can You Forgive Her. This one, the second CD single, has Can You Forgive Her, an MK remix, a remix by Johnny Marr of I Want to Wake Up, and a track called What Keeps Mankind Alive. And What Keeps Mankind Alive, by the way, has some piano work by the Reverend Richard Coles of Communards on it, which I didn't know until the other day when he was talking about it on Twitter. By the way, I do recommend you follow him. He's quite a funny man. So, Can You Forgive Her is a really unusual, slightly threatening track. It's written in an unusual time signature, which I think is 7/8, which is not like other Pet Shop Boys songs. And it had a number of releases. So there's a promotional 12-inch of the Rollo remixes. I don't know why it says D and F on there, because there is no side D and side F. There's a 2-track 12-inch there with the Rollo remixes on. There's a standard 12-inch, which is here, which is Rollo remixes and MK remixes. And as you can very clearly see, at this point, the band are deep inside what's called technically their pointy hats period. And also their pointy hats period extends as far as the videos. And almost all of the videos that the band were making at this point were built around the idea that they would be largely computer-generated versions of the band. And so there'd be an alternate reality, which I watched the Pop Art Videos DVD the other day, and they did talk talk about this quite explicitly, is they scan themselves into computers and then try to create an alternate version of reality, almost a Pet Shop Boys universe, where all the other things, like even the physical concept of a face or an object, would become almost redundant, in much the same way as that Kraftwerk kind of turned themselves into computer avatars from the Electric Cafe album and beyond. I know it's now called Technopop, but it isn't. It'll always be the Electric Cafe album. Can you forgive her? I must admit, I bought it when it dropped out of the charts because I didn't have very much money, which is a common theme of most of my record collecting in the 90s. But I was quite surprised by it when it came out. I was expecting something a little bit different, and we have this kind of weird avant-garde kind of song around jealousy and relationships, with a very sly, bitchy lyric about, you dance to disco and you don't like rock, pardon me, and also, of course, she'll make fun of you, and even in bed she says she's going to go and get a real man instead, which is very interesting when we talk about the band's, or more correctly, Neil Tennant's sexuality, because part of it actually was written about the time when Neil Tennant was in a heterosexual relationship and was not necessarily 100% convinced that that was his orientation, which changed over time. And in Attitude magazine in 1993 or 1994, Neil Tennant did state that he was gay, and so therefore removed maybe an element of ambiguity for some people, although for me I was like, well, that's not exactly news, is it? So moving on from that, late August 1993, the same day I think that New Order's World was released, came a single by Ian Wright called Do the Right Thing, which is Chris Lowe has produced and wrote the music on this. You can see it all on YouTube. It's basically a Pet Shop Boys track with a footballer called Ian Wright singing on it. And as we all know from World in Motion and Gaz's Fog on the Tyne, that is never a bad idea. So, a week after that, the band was certainly going very, very busy now, came the release of what is widely regarded as one of their absolutely classic singles, Go West, the cover of Village People's Go West. And let me tell you, Village People's version is terrible compared to this. This version is an absolute classic for two reasons. One, it doesn't sound terrible in the 70s. The other one is it has a new section which Pet Shop Boys have written into it, which talks about going and visiting the promised land where you'll take your stand. And it's just this beautiful anthem. I talked about in previous episodes around the AIDS epidemic, and around dead and wounded on either side, and around having friends that some are here and some are missing. Go West is another one of those songs that picks up the baton of talking about a thematic area about trying to find some kind of paradise, some land that doesn't exist, where everything is okay and you can be who you want to be, and one day we'll be free. It's a beautiful song. I love it. It's a highlight of any Pet Shop Boys gig. I don't think I've ever seen them play live and they haven't played it. Maybe at the Royal Albert Hall in 2017, when they did a show with an orchestra. They didn't play it, but aside from that, every full-length Pet Shop Boys show I've seen, Go West is near the end. And the CD, by the way, has a fantastic remix on it called The Ming's Gone West, first and second movement. The last part of it is this huge extended kind of like 10-minute bleepy exploration of all the musical themes that have been dropped out through the rest of the song. They drop the whole of the song down to its core components and rebuild it back up to an ecstatic ending, which obviously helps when they all kind of walk off stage and we've got lots of lasers while the band get into a car and drive away before the audience even realise that the show is finished. Go West is brilliant. I love it to bits. The B-side is Shameless, and it is one of the best B-sides of all time. There's also a CD single that was released in mainland Europe, which comes in a jewel case. It has two mixes which aren't on the other versions, the other CD versions. It's the Farley and Heller disco mix and the Kevin Saunderson tribal mix, whereas this one is backed with the Ming's Gone West first and second movements. So if you want to get all the versions of Go West on CD, you do have to buy the European CD single. And there's also a promo 12-inch. This is the Ming's Gone West second movement by Brothers in Rhythm. and the Farley and Heller Disco and Fire Island mixes. And there's also a standard 12-inch of Go West, which again is here, and I love this. These should have been badges, and if they weren't badges, they should have been. Which has got the first and second movement of the Ming's Gone West mix, and the Farley and Heller Disco mix, and the Kevin Saunderson Tribe mix. There is also, because of course there is a 7-inch single. Sadly, I only have a jukebox copy of it, so it looks pretty battered. But there you are. Hey, how do you know that's that? Well, you can't tell. It could be anything. You'll just have to take my word for it that it really is a Go West 7-inch single, which I bought from a newsagent's. But here we move on to the next thing that happened, which was their masterpiece, in my opinion. It came in 3 formats, 4 actually. Here's the vinyl edition of Very, the 5th Pet Shop Boys album, and this is just an absolute stone dead classic. It's a perfect Pet Shop Boys album. There is nothing about it that I would change at all. Not 1 minute, not 1 second, not 1 mix, not 1 gap, nothing. It is a perfect album, opening with Can You Forgive Her. This is an original 1993 vinyl edition, surprisingly well pressed. And at this point, the band have really, as I've said, gone into computer-generated artwork. So they've moved into a world that's almost a Pet Shop Boys universe, where they've set themselves out to be, ambassadors of pop, for a world of disco balls, where somehow the band themselves have almost ceased to exist and have just become avatars, like a disco Gilbert and George. Beautiful records. Absolutely love this to bits. If you're tempted with them and you go, well, where should I start? You can't go far wrong than this. It's got 12 songs on it. The vinyl edition, by the way, is missing a song, but I'll get to that in a moment. Which is Can You Forgive Her? I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing. Liberation, A Different Point of View, Dreaming of the Queen, and Yesterday When I Was Mad. Flip it over onto side 2 and you've got The Theatre, 1 and 1 Make 5, To Speak As a Sin, Young Offender, 1 in a Million, and Go West. On the CD editions, there is a postscript, a secret song sung by Chris Lowe, but it is not on the vinyl editions, by the way. And what I want to talk about is that just lyrically, this album is phenomenal. So we've gone through Can You Forgive Her as being kind of like a scene-setting piece of gender and sexuality and ambiguous jealousy. I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing. It's exactly the kind of song that you would expect from Paul McCartney in 1968. It is an incredibly sincere, open-hearted, generous love song. You know, ask me why, I'll say it's most unusual. I couldn't believe it when I met you. And it's all just about, I wouldn't normally do this type of thing. I wouldn't normally have emotions. I wouldn't normally feel feelings. And as I've said previously, you know, I'd gone from being somebody that had no experience of relationships to being in an adult relationship when this album came out. So to me, this album was very autobiographical. And they say all art is autobiographical. They never tell you whose autobiography it is. This one is probably the Pet Shop Boys album that's most about being in love as opposed to being out of or just about to get into being in love and being in relationships. And it's just fantastic. So I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing as a complete disco Beatles pastiche that you would expect a Beatles cover band to do, and everyone's going, I didn't know this was a Beatles song. Well, surprise, it isn't. And the third song on it is Liberation. And you know, you listen to those lyrics and there's a very kind of, not defensive, but there's a kind of very British, almost repressed approach to emotions in that album. And yet somehow Liberation just cuts straight through it, and it goes all the way back home at midnight. You were sleeping on my shoulder as we drive through the city. And it's just filled full of just little moments that just go, that's love. That's what love is. That's what being in a good, healthy relationship is. It's you know, it takes a couple of political kind of side steps. So, for example, Dreaming of the Queen is on there. Yesterday When I Was Mad, which is, yes, it's a Pet Shop Boys song about touring, but it's perhaps a slightly different one. And then side 2 opens with I think one of the neglected classics of the album, which is called The Theatre, which is inspired by something that a Conservative MP said. He said someone talked about the homeless and said, well, what do you think of the homeless? And went, well, they're those the bums we step over as we leave the theatre. And, you know, you've got an MP that's meant to represent the wishes of the people that comes forward with the political view that homeless people are just useless objects to be discarded and avoided when you leave the theatre. And that inspired the whole of that song. And by the way, the theatre was rehearsed for the 1994 tour. It wasn't performed. It was performed in the 1997 shows. And then you've got 1 and 1 Make 5. You've got To Speak Is a Sin. And To Speak Is a Sin, I think, is a great song about, as I kind of indicated when I was talking about actually, around what happens if you're not able to necessarily be open about your identity. You know, if you go to a certain bar and you look at a certain person and somehow you speak, then perhaps that is the moment where you betray what you really are. Kind of like if when you're very, very young and you're talking to a teacher and your voice goes all kind of funny and weird, and you know, it's that kind of thing, as it kind of betrays who you really are and your own nerves, and you can't help it. There's also Young Offender, which is around recidivism in young offenders. And then we've got 1 in a Million, which is just this fantastic little track, which, you know, they wrote every song on this album with the intention of it could have been a single. It's all killer, no filler, baby. And 1 in a Million, again, has this beautiful hook line, which is 1 in a million men could change the way that you feel. 1 in a million men, baby, this could be real. And it's just wonderful. And yet somehow the ending of the song builds to this crescendo that works on the same kind of like, you know, themes and endings and sounds that you've got that leads straight into the beginning of Go West. So it ends 1 in a million on almost like this chorus of seagulls and horns, and then Go West starts and it's a chorus of seagulls and horns. It's perfect. And then the end of the album, obviously Go West, is around moving to a promised land where you can feel free and confident and able to be who you are. It's a phenomenal album. Also, by the way, it's a design classic. For the first edition of the album, released in 1993 to 1996, came in what's now called the Lego box design. Which is this, you know, they were moving beyond the idea of the concept of a standard bit of design and creating a mass-produced work of art that was going to stand out on the shelf. Now, I've had to replace the case here, which was originally orange, with a see-through case. But that's the risk, is that they're not making any more of these, and it's just like this thing. It just looked like a Lego brick. And you were like, well, I don't even know what this is. It's weird and it's unusual, and it stands out on the shelf, and you're never going. And you know, if you're looking through the racks of the CDs, and you go, well, what am I going to buy? It's all little boxes with pictures of bands standing moodily in deserts next to broken down cars, and then all of a sudden you're looking at this weird orangey Lego brick. And by the way, even this shade of orange is not a common shade of orange. It's not a shade that you often see on record sleeves at all. You know, it very distinctly stands out from everything else. And EMI didn't want the band to use this cover, by the way. Pet Shop Boys had to take a royalty cut of 40 pence for every copy sold for this artwork, to take into account the extra manufacturing cost of a 3D design there. And it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Now that's just a standard version of the album. The most obvious limited edition of the album was this first pressing here. Which comes in a trifold kind of plastic wallet, again with the kind of almost like the indentations from the Lego bricks on, and it contains 2 albums. There's Very, which is in this card here, and there's a second album called Relentless, and Relentless is a great Lost Pet Shop Boys album. So Relentless is 6 songs. It's about 40 minutes long, of stripped back, high speed, high energy, almost minimalist techno tracks from 1993. It's like as if Pet Shop Boys were remixing their own material, and they just decided to create like a series of bangers, which had very, very minimal lyrics, almost like they were remixing previously unheard Pet Shop Boys songs. This was only available as a limited edition. The first 15,000 copies of Relentless and Very, the first 15,000 copies of Very had Relentless in it in this pack. And I remember kind of like a frantic race between the time when my student funding came in, between its release and between its selling out. So the day that I got my student funding in, I checked my bank balance and I knew I could find the copy of this in the W.H. Smith in Leicester, because everywhere else had sold out, and you didn't go to W.H. Smith to buy records unless you were weird or broke, and I was weird and broke, so that's how I did it. There was also a vinyl edition of Relentless. I don't have it. Very, very few people do. It was 500 copies on a promotional triple coloured vinyl 12-inch set. I think the cheapest copy I've been able to see recently is on Discogs for £400, and that's £370 more than I want to pay for it, so I'm not going to. And Relentless has never been reissued. So if you're a Pet Shop Boys completist, you could probably get the CD for maybe £20–30. Don't bother trying to track down the vinyl unless you've got more money than sense. If you're going to go and spend £500 for it, I could do with £500. Hit me up, gang. I'd appreciate it more than a record dealer. I probably shouldn't say that, but there you are. And then the third single from the album came out. Again, it followed the same kind of approach that we had for Very and Relentless, a kind of fold out plastic pack. Again, probably cost a fortune. 2 CDs here. I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing, and I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing, which the bands were kind of like presenting themselves in Beatles wigs and haircuts and heavy psychedelia long before Austin Powers was actually a thing. So one CD has 5 remixes on, including a completely brand new, revamped, re-recorded version with the Beatmasters, which is on this edition here, I think. No, it probably isn't. So yes, yeah, so the Beatmasters did a longer, re-recorded, extended version, lots of new parts in there, new bits and bobs, new vocals, new everything. And then there's the LP mixes on the second CD, and the second CD is also backed with Too Many People and a track called Violence, a re-recording that the band did in 1992 when they were going to go and play the Hacienda concert. They premiered the song Violence, but they rearranged it. I think Johnny Marr plays guitar on it. No, guitar by JJ Bell, sorry Johnny, and a remix by West End Girls by an artist called Sasha. Great little package actually. Since the band were, having big hits at the time, very easy to get affordable copies. And even now, if you want to pick up a 12-inch, I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing. This is 4 of the 5 songs on the CD, not the 7-inch mix. Or if you wanted to get the other 12-inch, again, you can pick them up for about £4 or £5. Very, very affordable, and just a lovely bit of packaging. So there we have, the second 12-inch. I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing. That is backed with 2 remixes of West End Girls by Sasha, which was the first time that the band had really issued a remix of a previous hit on a single. No idea why they got Sasha to remix it. Presumably they were thinking about releasing West End Girls in 1991 as a remix form, maybe to promote discography a little further, but that didn't work. And of course the 7-inch edition of it is backed with Too Many People. And again, that graphic design is just lovely. You can really tell that you're looking at a band that are operating very much completely in their own world, liberated free from the merciful constraints of things like, reality. Now, I can't remember which one comes next, so I'm going to go with Liberation, which is the next single here, and this is the 7-inch, which is backed with a track called Decadence. This one does have Johnny Marr on guitar, by the way, and this here is designed as a spinning top with an outline of both Chris and Neil's faces on there, so you can see those faces are, I think, slightly different. Now they're both Neil. But at this point the band had scanned themselves in, and their videos were all computer generated, so it was all very abstract sets of concepts, all directed by a guy I think called Howard Greenhow. And there was a 12-inch of Liberation, a limited edition double pack that's backed with on one side remixes of Young Offender by Jam and Spoon, and on the second disc it's remixes of Liberation by East Smooth and Merc. I have to tell you, these Liberation remixes are absolutely awful. They have no the Liberation remixes have no relation to the Pet Shop Boys original track whatsoever. Don't listen to them. They are hot steaming piles of absolute garbage, these remixes of Liberation. You've taken none of the original track out there, and you've got this kind of very genetic, super generic, highly repetitive track, where some guy just goes liberate, and it just carries on for like 20 minutes. And I was bored, and to be honest, I only bought it for the remixes of Young Offender. And in 1999 and 2000, Young Offender was brought back to the set lists alongside the being performed in the Jam and Spoon version, which I'll talk about when I get to their 2 CD singles for Liberation. This one has Decadence on it, and it has the Smooth mixes of Liberation on. Yeah. This one has the Jam and Spoon remix of Young Offender, and a remix of Decadence on, and 2 of the Merc mixes of Liberation, which are garbage. So only listen to the B-sides, don't listen to the originals. But as you can see, Neil and Chris, the Pet Shop Boys. Now, they're very busy during this period, because then came Absolutely Fabulous. Children in Need, novelty single, mid-1994, produced by Pet Shop Boys, written by Pet Shop Boys, not necessarily credited as a Pet Shop Boys single. So if I remember correctly, the artist name on here is Absolutely Fabulous. There's no credit whatsoever to it being a Pet Shop Boys track, even though they did play it live on the 1994 tour. And this 12-inch was dirt cheap, and probably really needs a clean, as you can tell by the sound that it comes in. Now, first versions of Absolutely Fabulous, by the way, the first week it came out, the CD single, some copies were backed with a track called This Wheel Is On Fire, which they didn't have permission to release because it's a cover version. And this is not one of those CDs. This is backed with the Absolutely Dubulous mix instead of This Wheel's on Fire. So if you have a copy of Absolutely Fabulous with This Wheel's on Fire on the B-side, that's quite rare. Although, would you care? I don't know. We then get to the 5th single. The band are really pushing it out now, so I think we've got about 4 singles already, plus Absolutely Fabulous. Here's the 5th single from the album, which comes in a gorgonzola of formats here, one of which I haven't actually got because I've got no way of playing it anymore. There was a double CD. This is Yesterday When I Was Mad, which is the first Pet Shop Boys song about touring. And opens with the lyric, "Darling, you were wonderful, you really were quite good. I enjoyed it, though of course no one understood. And it's all on tape that no one will find out." Kind of indicating that the man weren't as well known for being a live act as you might think. CD singles, quite cheap to pick up. Backed with a cover version of If Love Were All, which I think is an old Coward track, and Can You Forgive Her, a swing version, which is a rearrangement by Richard Niles in a kind of jazz style. Second CD has some remixes, and it has a track called Some Speculation on it. Some Speculation is a brilliant song, would fit right into the Relentless album. It's the same kind of thing, very mellow, very relaxed, low-key vocals. There was a cassette single which was backed with a track called Euro Boy, which is a banger, which again would ideally fit onto the Relentless album. And there is also a double 12-inch here, which has no barcode on it and no information whatsoever as to where it was made or when, but it does have both Euro Boy and Some Speculation receiving vinyl releases here, alongside, quite a lot of remixes of Yesterday When I Was Mad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 remixes of Yesterday When I Was Mad. I think this might be a promo. Yep, it's a promo only, double 12-inch of Yesterday When I Was Mad. And I think this might be, aside from the B-Sides album, the only commercial releases of Euro Boy and Some Speculation on vinyl. Here's a standard 12-inch, which is just remixes. Jam and Spoon mix of Yesterday When I Was Mad, which is pretty good. A Junior Vasquez Fabulous dub, which is not fabulous. And the RAF Zone mix, which again, not fabulous either. So, not really worth getting. And this was all kind of leading into the band's second remix album, which is one of their worst, Disco. Disco 2 is a... let's see what the hype's are on here. It doesn't tell you what it is, but I'll tell you what it is that it's two 22-minute mega mixes of remixes from the very album, backed with, right at the end, I think there's a remix of So Hard and a remix of We All Feel Better in the Dark, right at the end of the LP. And it's just a banger, really, and that's not necessarily in a good way. If someone was tasked with throwing together a mega mix of 45 minutes of Pet Shop Boys remixes off the most recent album, this is what they'd put in there. It's a listen once and then file curiosity. It is very, I mean, if you're going like, well, what am I going to buy? Buy it last, okay, because it's not very good. In America, there was a double CD version of it that had a second disc, which apparently contains previously unreleased Pet Shop Boys music, but actually contains Decadence, the first CD appearances at that point in time by some speculation on Euroboy, the Beatmasters mix of I Wouldn't Normally Do This Kind of Thing, and a remix of Yesterday When I Was Mad. I bought it to get Euroboy and some speculation on CD. It's not very good at all. Disco, terrible thing. Well, Disco too, anyway. There's a double CD, a Very, here it is, which came out in 2001 as part of their remasters package. It contains all the B-sides from the period alongside a number of unreleased tracks. It contains the A and B side of the aborted 1992 single version of Go West, which is a completely different recording with a different keyboard line. And it also contains the original version of Forever in Love. Forever in Love in a re-recorded remix form is on the Relentless album, by the way. It's also got a previously unreleased demo of a track called Confidential, which was a demo for Tina Turner, and a track called Falling, which started out as a remix of Go West and then turned into its own song. And then Falling later became a song on Kylie Minogue's absolutely wonderful Deconstruction album Here, which I strongly recommend because it is brilliant. It's probably Kylie's best album in my opinion. 1993's Deconstruction album, which has Confide in Me on it, which you should buy it because it's got Confide in Me on it. Anyway, it's also got the only appearance on a Pet Shop Boys release in its own name of Absolutely Fabulous, and it's also got a live cover version on it of Girls and Boys, and Girls and Boys appears on Discovery, which was released on Friday this week on a double CD and DVD release. And the double CD and DVD is probably £19. It's not on Blu-ray because the thing was shot on videotape, so there's no extra quality to be gained by throwing it onto Blu-ray. So it came out this week. It's previously only available on VHS. I listened to it. I danced in my office, this very room in fact, and had a great time the other day to it. So Discovery comes from the band's 1994 tour called Discovery, where they played cities and countries which they hadn't visited before. So Singapore, Australia, New Zealand and South America. They recycled some films and some costumes from the 1989 and 1991 tours because they'd never been seen in those places before. But they also took away the underarching narrative that sat through performance and gave us a 2-hour show of bangers and hits. So it's a full-on nosebleed, hands in the air, wave your hands in the air if you just don't care, whistles and lasers kind of show. It's just a disco, a huge, great big Pet Shop Boys disco of hits in a live show. Probably on YouTube, by the way, but has not been on DVD. In fact, it's only been on VHS and Laserdisc until this week. So there you have it. Discovery. I do wish they played more shows though, because between the end of 1991 and 1999 they didn't play anywhere in the UK, I think, apart from a one-off show in Manchester and a residency in London. So they went 8 years without playing anywhere to all intents and purposes that wasn't London. And certainly I don't think they played America in that time. They didn't play Europe in that time, apart from I think a handful of festival shows in 1997. They didn't play enough live shows, and I think it really hurt the band's commercial prospects because people couldn't see them, and they were, a really good live act, and they became better and better over time, but nobody could see them. So the only way that you could experience Pet Shop Boys Discovery Tour unless you went to an invitation show, which was at Brixton Academy, which was a rehearsal show, which only had maybe 100 people at it, or unless you went to Singapore, South America, Australia, or New Zealand, that the only place you could see Pet Shop Boys live between 1991 and 1997 was on VHS, which I don't think did them any favours whatsoever. Which is a nice way of saying, by 1994, when this came out, I was earning enough money to afford to see Pet Shop Boys, but they just couldn't be bothered to tour, which was quite frustrating as a fan. They also, by the way, on this tour, they debuted a new arrangement for a track, Paninero, which had previously been released as a single in Italy. And lo and behold, what better way of doing that than re-recording Paninero and releasing it as a single in 1995. 2 CD singles. This contains a remix and re-recording of In the Night, which was used for, I think, the BBC's Clothes Show and Girls and Boys, alongside the standard 7-inch version of Paninero, which was played live on the Discovery Tour. This is a chock full of remixes. I think there's 5 remixes on here, including the Pet Shop Boys extended mix. This came out a week before that, so in the way that they did it, as opposed to releasing all the formats on one day, they would stagger the releases, so you get a 12-inch and a CD, and maybe a cassette in your first week, and you get a second CD and maybe a second 12-inch in your second week. Keeps the song in the charts. So they did that. So for the first week, the only version of Paninero I'd heard was the extended version on the second CD single. There were also 2 12-inches of Paninero. And I don't care. This must be part 1, which contains Tracy's 12-inch mix and Sharon's Sexy Boys dub, the Tintin Out remix, and the Pet Shop Boys extended mix of the track. This contains Angel Morales' Deep Dance mix, Girls Boys in dub, a Hot and Spicy dub, and yeah, that's it. So between this, 7 remixes of Paninero and a 7-inch re-recording and rearrangement of Paninero, still haven't come out on vinyl, unless I think you buy one, unless you buy one of the Hits albums, which of course haven't been repressed. And all that was also backed up with the last release of the period, so very, very busy. But the Pet Shop Boys had a reputation for writing great B-sides, and most of their B-sides never appeared on an album. So in 1995, we got Alternative Pet Shop Boys. This is the first version of the album, which came in a lenticular sleeve. You can see here, dependent upon which angle or how you look at it, it's either Chris Lowe in a hat or it's Neil Tennant wearing what looks to be a hat. Yes. And, you know, it's just a lovely bit of design. It also contains all the B-sides and some commentary in a very, very nice book. Of all the B-sides from In the Night in 1985 through to Some Speculation, which is 30 Pet Shop Boys songs which have never been on an album before. I think Betchy's Not Your Girlfriend and Miserableism had been on the Japanese edition of Behaviour, but the others I don't think have been on any of the Pet Shop Boys albums. And the 1995 remix of Paninero wasn't on here. You got the original 1986 7-inch version. I think a couple of the extended mixes had been on the Disco album In the Night and Paninero in 1986. But aside from that, nothing on there was on any of the albums in their original 7-inch Pet Shop Boys forms. And of course, the easiest and cheapest way of getting all of the songs on here on vinyl is not to buy the vinyl version of Alternative, because it has not been repressed. Buy the original 7-inch singles. They're about £1 each, and they have almost all of the B-sides on. And this also saw Euroboy and Some Speculation finally appearing on an album. Well, it feels like I've been talking at you for about 45 minutes about Pet Shop Boys, and I haven't gone into a huge amount of detail about, I don't know, my personal feelings about the album. It's an album that I think has less for me in terms of meat to really eat through lyrically than Behaviour. My life was a lot happier when this album came out, and this album is a lot happier than Behaviour. My life was more settled, I was more mature. This is the first album which came out at the time where I regarded myself to be anything even vaguely near an adult and experiencing adult emotions and dealing with them in a mature way. It's also the Pet Shop Boys album that I think is also the most obvious one that seems to be have been made during a period of relationships that have been successful on the basis of the lyrical content of the songs that are in there. It's a classic. It perhaps deals with the personal rather than political and the socio-economic. But what it also does, which is wonderful, is it's a record you can put on at parties, and if there are ever parties ever again, or certainly there were at the time, you could put this on and every single song would sound like a hit, and that's the definition of one of the greatest albums that there is. This is one of the Pet Shop Boys' probably top 3 albums. I love it to bits, and thank you very much for your time and patience whilst I talk to you about a 28-year-old album. It's a banger. If you don't know it, listen to it. You know the songs. And if you hate the Pet Shop Boys, this is never going to change your mind. But if you're, I'm not sure, this might help you in deciding whether you love the band or not, because this is very Pet Shop Boys indeed. Right, that's a terrible pun I hadn't planned. I'm going to prop up and stop here. Thank you for your time and effort. I will link to a live show or two in the comments down there, probably Manchester. There's a radio broadcast of Santiago 1994. If I can find a copy of the Discovery show on YouTube, I will do. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other. If you've got suggestions for future episodes, pop them in the comments box. I will catch up with you some other time. I'm going to go downstairs and I think I'm going to start cooking actually tonight. Pizza and garlic bread and other things. And my cooking is terrible. The vast majority of you will have no idea how terrible my cooking is. Keep it that way for your own safety. Thank you very much. Bye.